Cancel culture is about convenience, not conviction. I think Shane being back on SNL proves this point. Cancel culture is about what is convenient in the moment, not an actual conviction that you have. Comedian Shane Gillis was hired by Saturday Night Live back in 2019. This was an incredible opportunity. I mean, it is one of the jobs that has led more comedians to huge stardom and fame and fortune than maybe anything else. Shane Gillis had been running a YouTube channel where he did all kinds of skit and sketch comedy. He got their attention, but he was fired a short time later. He was actually fired before he ever even debuted on the show. And this made a lot of news because back in 2019, cancel culture was really getting fired up and another comedian got canceled. However, Shane Gillis went on to quite a bit of fame in his own right. And now, just 5 years later, he found himself hosting Saturday Night Live, not being in the cast, but being the featured host that they brought in to be the focal point of the entire show. So why did Saturday Night Live have a change of heart? Here's the New York Times. Shane Gillis finally appears on Saturday Night Live. The comic was fired from the show in 2019 before ever appearing on it. History he barely mentioned when he hosted on Saturday. So here's the story. Finally given the opportunity to take the stage at NBC's Studio 8H, the comedian Shane Gillis did not say much about how he'd been fired as a cast member from Saturday Night Live before appearing in a single episode. Instead, Gillis, who has since gone on to become a popular stand-up and podcaster, delivered an opening monologue that perhaps suggested he and SNL, Saturday Night Live, were both better off having followed separate trajectories. Gillis, who has performed in stand-up specials like Beautiful Dogs on Netflix and is co-host of Matt and Shane's Secret Podcast, was announced to be an SNL cast member in September 2019. Just days later, SNL reversed course and dropped him from the lineup following criticism of resurfaced podcast segments in which Gillis used a slur to describe Chinese people and performed a caricature accent, and used a homophobic slur to refer to the filmmaker Judd Apatow and comedian Chris Gethard, as well as the presidential candidate Andrew Yang and Senator Bernie Sanders. So he got taken out for quite a few things. Returning to SNL nearly 5 years later as a guest host, Gillis did not take a scorched earth approach in his monologue like when Norm Macdonald appeared as a host in 1999. If you've never seen that, you should definitely watch that. So Shane Gillis has gone on to fame in his own right. Shane Gillis has a YouTube special that he put out on his own that has over 20 million views. Off the success of that, Netflix then put him on a contract. He released a stand-up special that stayed in the top 10 of all things viewed on Netflix for a very long time. One of his claims to fame is his podcast, Matt and Shane's Secret Podcast, has more Patreon members than any other podcast, I believe, on earth. Over 80,000 paid Patreon members. Just for reference, that's probably somewhere between $400,000 and $800,000 a month. So he's killing it. Why did SNL have a change of heart? Nothing has really changed about his comedic approach. He still is a true comedian. He is not politically correct. He goes places that most people would be very uncomfortable with. He goes on the Joe Rogan podcast with a bunch of characters that are very unsavory who would never get on stage at SNL. No one would allow that. And the culture is very divided by his appearance. Some see it as a win and are saying, this is it. We finally defeated cancel culture. The woke mob has lost all of their power. This is the end. Shane Gillis standing on that stage 5 years later. We have won the war. Cancel culture is over. At the exact same time, if you Google Shane Gillis, SNL, the majority of headlines from most media places are either downplaying his comedic effect or calling into question why SNL would allow him back on that stage when he truly hasn't changed his ways. So how do we actually think about this? First, let me say a few things about cancel culture broadly. Cancel culture is about convenience, not conviction. I think Shane being back on SNL proves this point. Cancel culture is about what is convenient in the moment, not an actual conviction that you have. Cancel culture is an opportunity to virtue signal in lieu of having actual virtue. And so whatever is convenient at the time to put your name behind, to put your social media accounts behind, to put a sign in your front yard, whether you believed it 2 years ago or not, whether you actually hold a strong conviction, whether you would still hold to it if there was a gun to your head or not, cancel culture is about virtue signaling, doing something that costs you nothing and gets you social credibility that you can do from the convenience of your home, that just signals, I'm a part of the in crowd and I understand what is culturally appropriate today, not because I have a strong sense of conviction about it, but because I don't want to be blacklisted in society and I want some instant social credibility with very, very little cost. And I think what we're seeing is that cancel culture will ultimately follow the money. When it is profitable to cancel someone, that's what they will do. Media outlets are getting massive clicks talking bad about Saturday Night Live today and putting out disparaging remarks about Shane and the job he did on the show. I didn't watch Saturday Night Live. I only watched his monologue. It was definitely not his best stand-up. It was braver than most things you'll see on there. So that's my very uneducated review on it. Cancel culture will ultimately follow the money. And so Shane Gillis was unproven. He didn't have 80,000 Patreons in 2019. He didn't have a Netflix special in 2019. He didn't have an army of fans in 2019. By the way, fans who typically probably do not tune into SNL, but will if Shane's on there. So why did SNL have a change of heart? Well, because cancel culture follows the money. If we can make money off of canceling you, we will. If we can make money off of uncanceling you and culturally restoring you, we will. And this has been a problem for basically all of human history. Even one of Jesus' closest followers simply followed the money. When he thought that Jesus would be very profitable to him as the actual king of Israel who sits on a throne and overthrows Rome, then he was all in. As soon as it became clearly apparent to Judas Iscariot that this was not going to be a profitable enterprise, that was the very moment that he went to the Pharisees and turned over Jesus and betrayed him. It's that very moment. Many people don't realize that. And so we'll read this in 2 different gospels. It's so cool that we have 4 gospels because we get the full picture from these different perspectives of eyewitnesses. In John chapter 12, 6 days before the Passover, Jesus came to Bethany where Lazarus was, the one Jesus had raised from the dead. And so they gave a dinner for him. Martha was serving them, and Lazarus was one of those reclining at the table. And Mary took a pound of perfume, pure and expensive nard, and anointed Jesus' feet and wiped his feet with her hair. And the house was filled with fragrance. And one of his disciples, Judas Iscariot, who was about to betray him, said, why wasn't this perfume sold for 300 denarii and given to the poor? Now, he didn't say this because he cared about the poor, but because he was a thief. He was in charge of the money bag and would steal part of what was put in. And Jesus answered, leave her alone. She has kept it for the day of my burial. For you always have the poor, but you do not always have me. Now, in Matthew's gospel, we get the chronological account. This is a synoptic gospel. We get the chronological account of what happened next. And so here's the end of the story. By pouring this perfume on my body, she's prepared me for burial. Truly, I tell you, wherever this gospel is proclaimed in the whole world, what she has done will be told in memory of her. Here's what happens next. We don't get this in John's because this is not a synoptic gospel. Matthew's is synoptic. In 14, then, the next thing, then one of the 12, Judas Iscariot, went to the chief priest and said, what are you willing to give me if I hand him over to you? So they weighed out 30 pieces of silver. And from that time, he started looking for a good opportunity to betray him. Cancel culture follows the money, like most people have done for most of history. And not most everyday people, but people who lack conviction. You see, let me remind you a few things. Cancel culture is about convenience, not conviction. For Judas Iscariot, following Jesus was about convenience. They put him in charge of the money bag. That was convenient. He could take money out of it. Jesus had displayed power like they had never seen before, and Israel was occupied by Rome, and they believed that Jesus would overthrow Rome and actually sit on the throne of David. And that would be very convenient to be one of the 12 people closest to him because you could leverage that power. Cancel culture is an opportunity to virtue signal in lieu of having actual virtue. He could follow Jesus around and he could be one of the disciples and he could do little tasks for Jesus and he could be the treasurer on the side, but it wasn't actual virtue. And because it's about convenience and there's no conviction at the core of it, it will follow the money. It will fire you in 2019 and host you in 2024. And it won't have to give a reason for that. It's just going to follow the money wherever the money goes. We're seeing this in real time as people who have gone really, really to extreme lengths to be politically correct are having struggles in their respective industries. And now they're beginning to reverse course. Why? Because they didn't go down that route because of conviction. They were trying to follow the social whims virtue signal, not based on conviction, but based on convenience. Instead of a cancel culture, I long for a conviction culture where people have true convictions in their heart that they're willing to put their life on. Conviction culture requires true integrity and will take a loss even amidst social and financial pressure. Jesus asked his disciples one day, what good is it for someone to gain the whole world, yet to forfeit their soul? And that is a question that we should be asking ourselves as well. Am I going along to get along? Am I being swept along by the current of culture based on what is convenient for me? Am I signaling out virtue without having true integrity? Am I just living to follow the money or status or fame? Or am I willing to stake my life on something? Do I have conviction around something? Am I willing to take a loss and to do something that costs me just because of the conviction that I have at the core of who I am? If you enjoyed this clip, make sure you check out the full podcast and subscribe and hit the notification bell to stay up to date with all new content. You can also support the channel at patreon.com/Clayton Tyner. Link is in the description below.